September 1939, the German foe begins its ruthless march of conquest and sets the stage for World War II.
Welcome to Never Forget. And today is a day that we shall never forget. 50 years ago in Munich, the Olympic began, and at 4:30 in the morning, September the 5th, the first attack by 8 terrorists, Palestinian terrorists, began. When it was all over, 11 Israeli athletes were dead. Today, 50 years later, we have Andre Spitzer, the wife of Andre Spitzer, who was a fencer. She will talk to us. Michael Barenbaum, Holocaust and Israeli historian from Los Angeles, will interview Anki with me. And also Ilana Romana, a widow at that time as well. Instead of me spending more time introducing everything, I'd like to introduce Michael Barenbaum from Los Angeles, Anki Spitzer, and Ilana Romana with her daughter. Michael, why don't you begin?
Okay, I'm going to ask a very simple question. 50 years is a half century, and therefore, for many of us, we can remember absolutely where we were at that day. For me, it's deeply personal because I was in Germany in my first trip into Germany. At that point, I was visiting, ironically, Dachau when all of this broke out. But I'd like you to describe for us a little bit tell us, first of all, about your husband, and tell us a little bit about the anticipation for the Olympics, and then what happened and where you were throughout all of this. Please.
Let's start with Anki.
With Dante.
Okay, I was married to Andre Spitzer, and he was 27 years old, and he was a fencing trainer. And we were married just a very short time, and we had a little baby daughter when he left for Munich, was only a little bit over 2 months old. His biggest dream was to participate in the Olympics because it is not the same as a world championship or a European championship. It is something special, the Olympics. It's also, a festival of brotherhood and peace. And I know that it was the dream of Andre to be part of the Olympic idea, part of the Olympic spirit. And he really anticipated with great hopes to be able to be amongst sporters from all over the world, never mind where they came from, never mind what their religion is or what their color is. And that was his dream. So he went to the Olympics. I took our baby daughter to my parents who lived in Amsterdam in Holland. And then I joined him because I was a fencer myself too. And we spent 2 wonderful weeks in Munich because, we were in the Olympic Village. And the Olympic Village in Munich was exactly as it should be. Wonderful atmosphere, everybody talking to each other. Everybody was dancing, films, playing games, and just meeting each other, except for competing, of course. So we had 2 wonderful weeks, and I was so lucky that I was able to be with him so that at least the last 2 weeks of his life, we were together. And, I still remember him in the Olympic Village when he saw the Lebanese delegation of the fencers. And, Lebanon was still is in state of war with Israel. And he said, I'm going to go there. And I said, are you nuts? The people are from Lebanon. And he said, Anki, there are no borders. There are no enemies at the Olympic Games. That's what I'm here for. Well, 2 days later, he was killed together with 10 of his teammates in a horrible way by Palestinian terrorists.
Where were you during this time?
Well, I was all this time with him. Of course, I could not sleep in the Olympic Village then because in 50 years ago, there was a men's village and a women's village, and the women had to leave at 11 o'clock at night, the men's village. So we, as a young couple, very much in love, we decided that we take a little, we take a room in the city of Munich so that we could be together. And every morning we would go back to the Olympic Village. And of course, I did not have an accreditation to go in, but we just went in through the exit because the German mind is one track mind. You go only out in the exit, but we came in every day in the exit. So we were there every day. But then 2 days before the massacre, I went back to Holland because our baby daughter was in the hospital, and Andre came with me, and he returned for the first time to his room the evening when the Palestinian terrorists came into the village.
We shall return to our interviews in a few minutes after a message from our sponsor.
This is an ITN newsflash from the Olympic Village in Munich, where early this morning armed Palestinian guerrillas raided the sleeping quarters of the Israeli team. The gunmen shot dead 2 Israelis and are now holding 20 athletes and 6 officials as hostages. The raid happened at about 4 a.m. Nearly 500 German security police have now sealed off the village and are mounting heavy machine guns in the square. They are keeping cameramen and television reporters and spectators well away.
Tell us a little bit about your husband, and tell us a little bit about your experience during this time.
On September 5th, in the morning, I suddenly heard a knock on the door. It was my neighbor, and she asked if I heard what happened in the Olympian Park. So I called the Olympic chair, and I was told not to worry, that they have only penetrated the trainers, and everybody else is outside, and I'm going to get a phone call. So I was waiting a phone call from my husband. He knew I was home worried with 3 little daughters, and I was sitting and waiting. So at 7 p.m., there was a knock on the door. It was the Olympian members. I was told that my husband was shot, but he's still alive and he's okay. So I told them, please tell me the truth. So they told me, well, actually, he was one of the murdered people. And then I got an injection and I fell asleep. And my daughter was 7, the other daughter was 4, and my little daughter was 6 months old. So when I woke up in the morning, I did not know if it's the truth or if it was a dream. But then I saw that my eyes were really, really red, so I might have been crying, so it might have been the truth. My daughters were not at home. Their aunts took them. So I realized that it is the truth and that my husband was murdered. I went to the airport to wait for the coffin. I was expecting to see all the other wrestlers and trainers, and I was waiting and no one came. And that's when I realized that all of them were murdered. None of them came alive. All of them were murdered. We drove to the cemetery. There were a lot of coffins. A lot of people had to be buried. I asked to see my husband's face, and I was denied. I was told, just remember him smiling. Just remember the happiness he instilled in you and your family.
קברנו את יוסי וחזרתי הביתה.
So we buried him, and then I went back home. It was 2 days later when I finally saw my daughters. Their eyes were red from crying for the last 2 days. I told them, girls, don't have to worry. We will remember Dad. Everybody will remember Dad. Everybody will know who your father was. And the girls said, well, we heard that Arabs killed our dad.
יודעים שהערבים הרגו את האבא.
And she said, no, Arabs did not kill your dad. It was terrorists, mean people that killed your dad. And remember that, it's the terrorists that killed your dad. And you don't have to worry. I'm going to be your mother and I'm going to be your father. I'm a very strong woman and I will be both of them for you. You will have a mother and you will have a father. That's me.
מי היו ספורטאים כולם.
Tell us what happened to you when you went to the airport and to the cemetery, and what happened in your life.
I came to the airport in another way. I went back to Munich, and I was there, and I came on the same plane with all the coffins. And I came to the airport and I had to get out of the plane, and I looked and I saw this enormous, huge crowd of thousands and thousands of people, all crying and screaming and everything. And I was really overwhelmed because I was only afraid of one thing, that I would see and meet my mother-in-law who just lost her only son. But fortunately then she was not back from abroad yet. So then they told me she is not there. So then I came down from the plane, and Andre was not buried with the other athletes because they were waiting for his mother to come back, and she came back the next night. And then he was buried in Israel.
In a few minutes, we shall return to our interview after a very short message from our sponsor.
Let me ask a political question, but a very important one. For many people, the great anger at the Olympic Committee was the anger specifically at Avery Brundage. Avery Brundage was the chairman of the Olympic Games, and for many of us, the most obscene political moment in the entire Olympic history was when he said the Games must go on. And I think everybody would like to know from both of you how you felt at that moment when you heard that statement. Why don't we get your answer, please, Hagi?
We know that Avery Brundage is a self-professed Nazi. He was, totally active in trying to get the Nazi Games in 1936 in Berlin going. And he didn't change, if you read his history and his beliefs and the way he spoke. And I was in the stadium, the Olympic Stadium in Munich, when he spoke the words, the Games must go on. If you go back to his speech, what he said there, nothing was said about the Israeli victims. He was talking about Rhodesia and about all kinds of politics, which had nothing to do with it. He couldn't care less, Avery Brundage. And I heard the words that he said, the Games must go on. I said, I have to do something. I have to stand up in this stadium with all these people, 80,000 people, and show, why he is making this decision. But I said, Andre was such a modest and such a gentle soul, he wouldn't want me to do any demonstrations here. But I have listened to his speech many, many times afterwards, and you can only brand him as a real Nazi, fitting in very well with all the other people in Germany at that time, the authorities of Bavaria and of Germany that we had to deal with in the beginning of the 70s and also in the 80s and even into the 90s, who were all had their feet in their dark past of Germany, not to call them Nazis. I'm just saying it nicely.
Remember, this program is never forget, so you don't have to be polite at all.
כסף יענה הכל.
The Olympic board decided that they will continue the Olympic Games. 11 Israeli athletes were murdered. Yet Germany said, no, we have sponsors. We need to film it on TV. We need to show the world our Olympics. And they just continued the Olympic Games as though no one was murdered. 11 Israeli athletes were murdered. They were participating in the World Olympics. Not a word, nothing, as though nothing happened. The Olympics continued and it was shown on TV as though nothing happened.
נרצחו, סליחה, נרצחו. הדם לא יבש של הנרצחים שלנו.
The blood was not even dry, and yet the Germans decided we have to continue as though nothing happened. They did not take any responsibility. They blamed us. We need to continue our Olympic Games as though nothing happened.
Let's ask one more question. What has happened since? Have you been at all satisfied that the Olympic Committee remembers this event? Has anybody assumed responsibility for what happened in 1972? And then I'll ask one final question, which is you saw the movie portrayal of Israel trying to be rid of and targeted justice for those who had participated in Munich. How did you feel about those actions and that portrayal? Spielberg movie, Munich.
That's right.
Well, Spielberg made a film about it. It was wonderful that he made a film 49 years after the murder of my husband. So we finally got a film. 50 years later, Thomas Bach finally did something. When we were in Tokyo, there was a minute of silence. The flags were half-staffed. The people were mentioned, the people that were murdered, the victims were mentioned. Finally, we had closure after 50 years of fighting. Germany finally gave us what we prayed for, what we deserved, a minute of silence. And finally, it was mentioned in the Olympic arena. What Thomas Bach did is what we were fighting for the last 50 years. We were sitting in the stadium and we were sobbing. This finally happened. This was finally mentioned. We want to thank Thomas Bach for his fight and for achieving this. They were finally mentioned, the people that were murdered. There was finally a responsibility. The Olympic arena finally took charge and accepted what happened 50 years ago in the Olympics, during the Olympics in Germany.
Abuse.
It is surrealistic when you think about it, that we have to fight for 49 years with the Olympic organization, the International Olympic Committee, to get a moment of silence. You know, I asked one of the presidents, not the present one, and I said, if it would have been the American Dream Team who had been murdered, you know, in the Olympic Village, would it also take so long? And would you also not have a minute of silence? Would you also not mention it, what happened? You know, and then they looked at me and they said, well, maybe you're right, because we probably would have done it. I said, okay, so you only didn't do this for 49 years because they were Israelis and they were Jews. So if that's the truth, then I must say that we are disgusted. But then fortunately, in Tokyo, in the last summer, we had a new president of the International Olympic Committee, Thomas Bach, and he had the guts and the courage to stand up against all the other Arab members of the International Olympic Committee. And he made sure, after he heard our plea, after we met him many times, and said that he has to do the right thing, finally, after 49 years, he did it. And we were really, like Ilana said, we were totally taken by surprise. We were We couldn't believe it that it finally happened, because all these years we went to all the Olympic Games. We asked at every Olympic Games to mention what happened in Munich in order that people would understand and that this would never happen again.
We join with the entire Jewish world in mourning your loss, even 50 years later. Secondly, we admire your courage and your dignity, and we deeply admire your deeply respect your quest for justice and for knowledge. So thank you very much, and I turn it back to Steve.
I'd like to echo Michael's sentiments. I am a child of Holocaust survivors. My father survived Mauthausen. 80 relatives of mine were gassed in Auschwitz, including my paternal grandparents, the sisters of my father. And as I said, 80 relatives from my father's side, from my mother's side, my uncle, who I'm named after, were killed by Nazis. There is a wound inside me, and I think there's a wound inside of other Jews whose family did not survive or suffered in the Holocaust. And then on top of that, in Germany, you have this Olympic tragedy of all, and not only Germany, in München, which was a center of Hitler's beginning. This is where Hitler began. So there's a wound that is festers inside my body. I know that. And when I hear all this, the pain that Ilana is sharing, the pain that you share, that you're sharing this already 50 years, and your children suffer from it, and everybody's child suffers from it. I say, I don't know how we can end this, because in Germany, it's a country like every other country. You have anti-Semites. We have anti-Semites in America. So it's, anti-Semitism is around for 2,000 years. It's going to be around for another 2,000 years. And we suffer. We suffer from the hate that we have received, not only 80 years ago, where they killed 6 million of us, but even the 11 people that they killed in Munich. And I don't know how we can reconcile this. But we have what you say, like in a divorce, we have irreconcilable differences. And I think we have to accept that. And when we say never forget, we say it to ourselves.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. I will have to leave you guys because I have another interview coming up. So thanks for having us.
Ilana, thank you, Ilana. Thank you very much. Okay, let's say shalom for now.
Shalom, shalom.